Annihilation of Caste by Babasaheb Ambedkar. 21. What are your chances of success? Social reforms fall into different species. There is a species of reform which does not relate to the religious notion of people but is purely secular in character. There is also a species of reform which relates to the religious notions of people. Of such a species of reform, there are two varieties. In one, the reform accords with the principles of the religion and merely invites people who have departed from it to revert to them and to follow them. The second is a reform which not only touches the religious principles but is diametrically opposed to those principles and invites people to depart from and to discard their authority and to act contrary to those principles. Caste is the natural outcome of certain religious beliefs which have the sanction of the Shastras, which are believed to contain the command of divinely inspired sages who were endowed with a supernatural wisdom and whose commands, therefore, cannot be disobeyed without committing sin. The destruction of caste is a reform which follows under the third category. To ask people to give up caste is to ask them to go contrary to their fundamental religious notions. It is obvious that the first and second species of reform are easy, but the third is a stupendous task, well nigh impossible. The Hindus hold to the sacredness of the social order. Caste has a divine basis. You must therefore destroy the sacredness and divinity with which caste has become invested. In the last analysis, this means you must destroy the authority of the Shastras and the Vedas. I have emphasized the question of the ways and means of destroying caste because I think that knowing the proper ways and means is more important than knowing the ideal. If you do not know the real ways and means, all your shots are sure to be misfires. If my analysis is correct, then your task is Herculean. You alone can say whether you are capable of achieving it. Speaking for myself, I see the task to be well nigh impossible. Perhaps you would like to know why? I think so. Out of many reasons which have led me to take this view, I will mention some which I regard much important. Out of these reasons is the attitude of hostility which the Brahmins have shown towards this question. The Brahmins form the vanguard of the movement for political reform, and in some cases also of economic reform. But they are not to be found even as camp followers in the army raised to break down the barricades of caste. Is there any hope of the Brahmins ever taking up a lead in the future in this matter? I say no. You may ask why. You may argue that there is no reason why Brahmins should continue to shun social reform. You may argue that the Brahmins know that the bane of Hindu society is caste and, as an enlightened class, could not be expected to be indifferent to its consequences. You may argue that there are secular Brahmins and priestly Brahmins, and if the latter do not take up the cudgels on behalf of those who want to break caste, the former will. All this, of course, sounds very plausible. But in all this, it is forgotten that the breakup of the caste system is bound to affect adversely the Brahmin caste. Having regard to this, is it reasonable to expect that the Brahmins will ever consent to lead a movement that ultimately result of which is to destroy the power and prestige of the Brahmin caste? Is it reasonable to expect the secular Brahmins to take part in a movement directed against the priestly Brahmins? In my judgment, it is useless to make a distinction between the secular Brahmin and the priestly Brahmin. Both are kith and kin. They are two arms of the same body and one bounded to fight for the existence of the other. In this connection, I am reminded of some very pregnant remarks made by Professor Dicey in his English Constitution. Speaking of the actual limitation on the legislative supremacy of Parliament, Dicey says, the actual exercise of authority by any sovereign whatever, and notably by Parliament, is bounded or controlled by two limitations. One of these is the external, and the other is the internal limitation. The external limit to the real power of a sovereign consists in the possibility or certainty that his subjects, or a large number of them, will disobey or resist his laws. The internal limit to the exercise of a sovereign arises from the nature of the sovereign power itself. Even a despot exercises his powers in accordance with his character. which is itself molded by the circumstance under which he lives, including under that head the moral feelings of the time and the society to which he belongs. The Sultan could not, if he would, change the religion of the Mohammedan world, but even if he could do so, it is the very highest degree improbable that the head of Mohammedanism should wish to overthrow the religion of Muhammad. The internal check on the exercise of the Sultan's powers is at least as strong as the external limitation. People sometimes ask the ideal question why the Pope does not introduce this or that reform. The true answer is that a revolutionist is not the kind of man who becomes a Pope, and that a man who becomes a Pope has no wish to be a revolutionist. I think these remarks apply equally to the Brahmins of India, and one can say with equal truth that if a man who becomes a pope has no wish to become a revolutionary, a man who is born a Brahmin has much less desire to become a revolutionary. Indeed, to expect a Brahmin to be a revolutionary in matters of social reform is as idle as to expect the British Parliament, as was said by Leslie Stephen, to pass an act requiring all blue eyed babies to be murdered. Some of you will say that it is a matter of small concern whether the Brahmins come forward to lead the movement against caste or whether they do not. To take this view, in my judgment, to ignore the part played by the intellectual class in the community. Whether you expect the theory of the great man as a maker of history or whether you do not, this much you will have to concede that in every country the intellectual class is the most influential class, if not the governing class. The intellectual class is the class which can foresee, it is the class which can advise and give lead. In no country does the mass of the people live the life of intelligent thought and action. It is largely imitative and follows the intellectual class. There is no exaggeration in saying that the entire destiny of a country depends upon its intellectual class. If the intellectual class is honest, independent, and disinterested, it can be trusted to take the initiative and give a proper lead when a crisis arises. It is true that intellect by itself is no virtue. It is only a means, and the use of means depends upon the ends which an intellectual person pursues. An intellectual man can be a good man, but he can easily be a rogue. Similarly, an intellectual class may be a band of high souled persons ready to help, ready to emancipate erring humanity, or it may easily be a gang of crooks or a body of advocates of a narrow clique from which it draws its support. You may think it a pity that the intellectual class in India is simply another name for the Brahmin caste. You may regret that the two are one, that the existence of the intellectual class should be bound with one single caste, that this intellectual class should share the interests and aspirations of the Brahmin caste, which has regarded itself the custodian of the interest of that caste, rather than of the interests of the country. All this may be very regrettable, but the fact remains that the Brahmins form the intellectual class of the Hindus. It is not only an intellectual class, but it is a class which is held in great reverence by the rest of the Hindus. The Hindus are taught that the Brahmins are Bhudevas, gods on earth, Varnanam Brahmanam Guru. The Hindus are taught that Brahmins alone can be their teachers. Manu says, if it be asked how it should be with respect to the points of the Dharma which have not been specifically mentioned, the answer is that which Brahmins who are Shishthas propound shall doubtless have legal force. Anamnateshu dharmehu katham syaditi ched bhavta yam shishta brahmanam bruyu sa dharma syadashnita. When such an intellectual class which holds the rest of the community is in grip, is opposed to the reform of caste, the chances of success in a movement for the breakup of caste appear to me to be very, very remote. The second reason why I say the task is impossible will be clear if you will bear in mind that the caste system has two aspects. In one of its aspects, it divides men into separate communities. In its second aspect, it places these communities in a graded order, one above the other, in social status. Each caste takes its pride and its consolation in the fact that in the scale of castes, it is above some other caste. As an outward mark of this gradation, there is also a gradation of social and religious rights, technically spoken of, an ashtadhrikara and sanskara. The higher the grade of the caste, the greater the number of these rights, and the lower the grade, the lesser the number. Now, this gradation, this scaling of castes, makes it impossible to organize a common front against the caste system. If a caste claims the right to interdine and intermarry with another caste placed above it, it is frozen. Instantly, it is told by mischief mongers, and there are many Brahmins amongst such mischief mongers, that it will have to concede interdining and intermarriage with castes below it. All are slaves of the caste system, but all the slaves are not equal in status. To excite the proletariat to bring about an economic revolution, Karl Marx told them, "You have nothing to lose except your chains." But the artful way in which the social and religious rights are distributed amongst the different castes, whereby some have more and some have less, makes the slogan of Karl Marx quite useless to excite the Hindus against the caste system. Castes form a graded system of sovereignties, high and low, which are jealous of their status and which know that if a general dissolution came, some of them stand to lose more of their prestige and power than others do. You cannot, therefore, have a general mobilization of the Hindus, to use a military expression, for an attack on the caste system. The end.